Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I'm Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. Today, we're going over an absolutely massive video that I put out every single year. That's right, this is 8 years of VR games ranked. Now this time we're doing things a bit differently because the list of games was getting so massive, it's now in the hundreds, and I'm not going to make you sit through me discussing 500 separate games. So instead, today I'm really trimming the fat and only going over the top 100 games. Now this does include PCVR, PlayStation VR 1, PlayStation VR 2, and all MetaQuest titles. So nothing will be missed here, and I will point out my personal favorites. Now there are of course links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead, but before we jump in, this video is brought to you by my sponsor, Kiwi Design. Kiwi has accessories for all of your favorite headsets, and they finally started releasing some new products for the Quest 3. On screen we have their brand new extra comfy Quest 3 Elite strap. I've been using head straps from Kiwi for years now, and they're hands down my favorite. There's a link to Kiwi down in the description, and don't forget to use discount code Mateo311 for 5% off and to help support my channel. Now just a few quick notes before we get started. Reviewing games can be highly subjective, but the three main criteria I use to rank a game include how fun is it a good value, and what's the overall quality level. Now the margin between the first 50 or so games is very slim, to the point that they're almost interchangeable. But as we get to the second half of the video, we're really going to see the cream of the crop of what VR has to offer. Now right before we get started, make sure to drop your favorite VR game of all time down in the comments, or if I missed the game that you think should be in the top 100, let me know what it is. Well, let's start off with number 100, Table of Tales. For the tabletop adventure fans out there, this is an excellent experience. The narrator feels like a personal dungeon master, weaving an intriguing tale that plays out on a game board in front of you. The combat is highly strategic and rewarding, and the overall storyline takes some nice twists and turns, keeping it interesting. So if you enjoy something like Demio but wish it had more of a storyline, go check out Table of Tales, The Crooked Crown. Next up, we have the absolutely fantastic party game, Takeling's House Party. This is an asymmetrical experience where one player is in VR, and up to 8 other players can join in with controllers or on their cell phone. The VR player is generally up against all of the smaller Takeling creatures, but there's multiple different gameplay modes that operate as team-based or free-for-all. Takelings is the ultimate house party game, and I highly recommend you check it out, especially if you want to show off VR to some noobs. Now another older VR title that deserves plenty of recognition is Journey of the Gods. This role-playing game features excellent VR mechanics, a compelling storyline, and challenging combat. Now the RPG elements are on the lighter side, but if you really need a VR RPG fix and never tried this game before, you should definitely give it a shot. Now the vast majority of games on this list are native VR titles, but every once in a while a game gets ported to VR and shines even more than the original. Keep Talking and No One Explodes is one such title. This quirky puzzle game has one person in VR attempting to defuse a bomb, while others outside of the headset cannot see what the user is doing and can only reference a manual to try and assist. Communication is key here, as the puzzles are designed to specifically mix you guys up. This becomes a hilarious experience, and VR just makes it so much more immersive. And speaking of immersion, there's not much cooler than an X-ray kill cam up close and personal. Sniper Elite VR takes the game's original formula of stealth and snipe killing, but also gives you a whole new never-before-played campaign. Missions vary from straight-up firefights where you're mowing down as many enemies as possible, to infiltration missions where stealth is an absolute necessity. So if you're looking for a shooter that focuses on sniping or stealth, Sniper Elite VR should be your go-to game. Now one of the go-to games for survival fans is Green Hell. This is yet another flat screen port that ups the immersion. You'll almost start to shiver and hear your stomach rumbling as you stumble around lost in the Amazon jungle. You'll quickly need to learn how to build a shelter and what foods are safe to forage. Now the jungle itself is already pretty lethal, but just wait until you add in the indigenous population and all of the excessively violent wildlife. But if you're looking to run directly into danger and face it head on with a bit of a smile, well then you should try Hellsweeper. Hellsweeper offers up a dark and gritty world, excellent VR combat mechanics, and the ability to bring a friend along for some co-op gameplay. You'll be fighting your way through a hellish landscape, going up against demonic-like creatures with swords, spells, and even firearms, which you get to level up over time, unlocking amazing new features. There's also some fast-paced, high-flying parkour-style movement, including some truly badass backflips. But if you're looking for a much more straightforward firefight, I highly recommend Fracked. Fracked is like your average B action movie starring Vin Diesel, where it's just all about over-the-top action and taking down as many enemies as possible. So when you're not doing some ridiculous ski stunts or murdering individuals, you'll most likely be hanging from a ledge on something that's collapsing, or just witnessing Michael Bay-style explosions go off all around you. Overall, this is a nice adrenaline ride with graphics reminiscent of Borderlands. Now, if you rather slow things down a bit and you're looking for a storyline, I highly recommend Stranger Things VR. This game takes place throughout different moments in the entire Stranger Things series, and you'll be taking control of multiple different characters, including the main antagonist, Vecna. This journey takes you everywhere from gaining control of the Upside Down to inside of the personal thoughts of multiple different characters in this universe. This is a must-play for Stranger Things fans, as the game does reveal a lot of additional information, and I just really enjoyed this unique brand of trippy storytelling. Now, if you're looking for humor instead of horror, we have Trover Saves the Universe. This is a third-person platforming adventure title with a really quirky storyline. The co-creator of Rick and Morty, Justin Roiland, lent his voice acting skills to this game, and overall it has that same quirky style of humor as Rick and Morty. So don't go into this game expecting to take it seriously, but if you enjoy both platformers and that wacky humor, you'll most likely really enjoy this game also. But if you come to VR looking for some brutal physics-based combat, we have Hellsplit Arena. Unlock a wide array of different weapons and equipment, and battle an array of undead creatures with some of VR's best melee mechanics. This is also a title that improves significantly over time, adding additional elements like jousting, and an excellent modding system that has brought tons of unique new content. So if you're looking for mature-themed combat with plenty of replayability, Hellsplit Arena should be your go-to title. Now, a very similar title that's also given us plenty of updates over the years is Swordsman VR. This is yet another physics-based arena fighter, but it also includes a full RPG leveling system, unique special abilities and magical weapons, plus an array of different historically themed combatants, including a few that go full-on fantasy mode. The amount of updates this game has given us over time is absolutely fantastic, which includes everything from battling a kraken to a whole new combat AI system that's extremely challenging. But if physics-based combat just isn't your thing, let's jump into Jurassic World Aftermath. There's a fantastic dose of nostalgia here, as this title does an excellent job blending with the original movies, and it also gets your heart pumping as you play cat and mouse with a bunch of dinosaurs, including the infamous Velociraptor. There's definitely some light horror themes here, plus a good amount of jump scares, but overall it has the right level of scariness, blended together with an interesting storyline. But if horror is just not your thing, why not give city building a try instead? Cities VR offers a VR version of City Skylines, including its highly strategic, unforgiving, and ultimately challenging simulation mechanics. Cities VR is for those who really want to put in the effort and enjoy the unique complexities that go into managing a city. Now, if that sounds a bit too difficult and you're looking for some instant gratification, well then the clear choice is Little Cities VR. This is a much more chill and laid-back city building experience. You'll be given an array of different little islands to populate, and before you know it, an hour or so goes by, and you'll have a cute little thriving city at your fingertips. One of the latest updates goes beyond just city building and also allows you to create the overall landscape. Speaking of landscapes, let's move away from that isometric viewpoint and get to scaling some surfaces in the climb. This is another one of those unique titles that only truly works in VR. Now, we have seen plenty of climbing mechanics in flat screen titles, but none of them actually put you on the ledge, holding on for dear life, while potentially inducing a little bit of vertigo or some acrophobia. This is one of the more adrenaline-inducing titles out there, and it's made all the better with unique environments like scaling skyscrapers or ice cliffs out in the Arctic. So this is fantastic if you're looking for a touch of nature, plus a nice dose of adrenaline. But for those who just want to remain grounded and fight some zombie-like creatures, we have Drop Dead the Cabin. Now, this is definitely one of your more unique zombie fighting games, as your main goal is to defend a radio tower and hold out long enough for extraction. Where most zombie shooters have you packing tons of ammo and mowing down enemies by the hundreds, this game is much more challenging, equipment is sparse, and you'll also have to make strategic decisions on how to best utilize your resources. Now, two additional features that also make this game excellent is co-op support that allows you to bring a buddy along, plus an absolutely fantastic mixed reality version that'll turn your own personal house into a zombie survival bunker. Now we're nearly 20 games in already, and we're still yet to mention the stealth genre. This is where the budget cut series comes in. At first glance, you wouldn't really know this robot-filled world is actually a stealth title, but since you become an easy target the second you're noticed, stealth is really the only viable option. Now, as you battle through robots that are currently in control of the world, you'll utilize a very specific VR mechanic that at this point will either feel completely dated or extremely unique. Locomotion is driven by your ability to open up portals, which you can actually see through before moving on. This is absolutely fantastic for scoping out areas or getting the jump on enemies, but a lack of free locomotion can definitely feel dated in 2024. So if you prefer something with a new age feel, I highly recommend Arc Axer. This is an absolutely massive RPG with some truly unique mechanics. You'll switch between third-person dungeon crawling and first-person turn-based combat. Now, even though combat is turn-based, you'll still be utilizing motion controls and actively dodging incoming attacks. There's also a pretty insane level of content as you make your way up throughout the giant spire. Arc Axer is easily one of the most unique VR games available, and I highly recommend it for RPG fans looking for something different. But if you prefer to stick to more typical genres, Ancient Dungeon is a fantastic dungeon crawling experience. Don't let the Minecraft-style graphics fool you. This is an excellent journey filled with traps, treasure, and lots of enemies. Now, solo dungeon crawling does eventually get a bit boring, and that's why I'm happy to report that they will eventually be adding some co-op to this game. Now, a surprising genre that works extremely well in VR is a good old-fashioned boomer shooter, and Shock Troops is an absolutely fantastic example. It still has that classic feel and style from old school shooters, but it's been made from the ground up for VR and offers up a truly unique experience. If you're a fan of old school shooters like Quake, Doom, Duke Nukem, you absolutely have to put this game on your list. But if you're looking for another old school style genre, Iron Guard delivers an excellent tower defense experience. You're dropped on an alien world and forced to defend yourself with both a primary ship controlled by motion controls, plus an array of defense turrets that you can upgrade over time. There's fully narrated cutscenes, a massive amount of content, and just some really addictive gameplay. While I would prefer a more fleshed out RTS title rather than just a tower defense, but overall Iron God does a great job of scratching that specific itch. Now, speaking of itches, I can't tell you which one Beanstalker scratches because it's just such a unique game, but it is yet another addictive title with plenty of content. Beanstalker allows you and your friends to climb through unique environments, battle an array of different bug-like creatures and epic bosses, and also scavenge for rare resources to build up your arsenal of weapons and tools. Crafting is where this game truly shines, because while collecting those resources can be a bit of a grind, it's also extremely rewarding to create some new equipment. Now, if you have no interest in any sort of grind, and you prefer excellent storytelling, combat, and graphics, then you should definitely slice your way through Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. This third-person adventure puzzle title is designed to mimic schizophrenia, as the main character is a broken warrior on a vision quest that'll have them facing up against demons. So as long as you don't have an issue with a third-person game that utilizes gamepad controls, Hellblade should be a must-play title for all PCVR owners. Now, another unique VR game that I love to recommend is Cards and Tankards. This free-to-play trading card game can be absolutely addictive, and it doesn't matter if you're a casual or super competitive. Just go ahead, drop into any open tavern, make some friends, watch a few games, or just go ahead and battle it out. If you want to get a little bit more comfortable, you could battle against AI, and there's a massive amount of cards to unlock that'll help you build your perfect deck over time. Now, if you don't shy away from competition and prefer that it's both violent and realistic, well then your go-to game should be the military sim Onward. Onward's all about keeping it real with highly immersive motion controls, always on friendly fire, and a selection of realistic military weapons and tools. This might be a little bit overwhelming to the noobs out there, and the current remaining player base of Onward is pretty hardcore at the moment, so if you haven't played this game before, just make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Now, if you still prefer authentic weapons, but much rather jump into a fantasy-themed game, we have the Light Brigade. This is one of VR's best roguelikes, which is saying a lot because that is a genre that is super populated. The Light Brigade not only has you fighting against Nazi-like enemies, but also an array of different creatures. Luckily, besides your typical World War II weaponry, you'll also have some spells at your disposal. Now, for those who aren't a fan of the typical roguelike gameplay loop, I will say that the Light Brigade feels a lot more like a typical single-player campaign, and it's not just your typical death and start over constantly until you get a little bit more powerful. But taking a break from all the violence, we have the rhythm-style game Synth Riders. Synth Riders has you chasing orbs with both of your hands, and it's uniquely designed to almost make you naturally start dancing. There's an absolutely massive array of unique songs, including these truly awesome virtual experiences that take the visuals to a whole new level. Now, jumping back to a staple genre in VR, we have the zombie shooter with the Arizona Sunshine series. This is, however, one of the most refined and feature-rich zombie shooters out there, as it contains a full, lengthy campaign with the option of co-op, plus a horde mode for maximum replayability. There's also a nice sense of humor and witty one-liners throughout the series, and the second game introduces an absolutely fantastic dog companion, which you can use to help rip your way through some zombies. Now, if the whole zombie shooter scene isn't for you, why not check out The Lab, VR's ultimate collection of free-to-play minigames. The Lab was one of the first VR games ever released, and it was designed by Valve to show off exactly what VR is capable of. There's extremely detailed worlds to explore, an addictive tower defense game, cinematic events featuring the robots from the Portal universe, plus many more excellent demos to show off. If you're looking to introduce someone to VR, this is an excellent first stop, but even if you are a VR enthusiast who's never tried the lab, I recommend you go download it right now. Now, for those looking to break a sweat in VR, there's almost no better option than Thrill of the Fight. This boxing experience delivers both true-to-life fighting mechanics, plus some extremely intense combat. You'll have to jab, punch, hook, and uppercut your way through an array of different fighters, and in between matches, you can try out an array of different ways to train. So the game's almost half exercise and half extremely awesome combat. Now, if you're looking to use more than just your fists, I highly recommend Dragon Fist VR Kung Fu. This is another physics-based combat title, but instead of focusing on realism, it's inspired by old-school kung fu movies. There's tons of unique characters with their own special abilities to unlock, a large array of unique arenas, plus online PvP and co-op modes. If you're playing this game on PCVR, you also have the added benefit of using full body trackers, which definitely takes combat up to a whole new level. But if you're not looking to break a sweat in VR, I highly recommend the retro shooter Compound. Compound combines some old school style graphics with new age roguelike mechanics. There's plenty of awesome weapons to unlock that you'll get to utilize against an array of unique enemies. The combat can also be quite challenging, and this game has a massive amount of replay value. Now, even though this is one of the earlier roguelites, I understand the genre is overdone in VR, and some people just prefer a straightforward campaign, so that's why I recommend the horror title Lies Beneath. Its comic book style graphics work extremely well in VR, the overall storyline and atmosphere is definitely creepy, the studio did a great job with the sound design, and finally the combat is solid, making this an overall great experience. Now, if you want all of that without the horror theme, your go-to game should most likely be Stormland. You'll play as a robot who's been offline for quite some time, and the whole world around him has changed. You'll eventually meet some companions that fill you in on what happened, but the overall storyline goes much deeper. Now, besides excellent storytelling, locomotion, and combat mechanics, this game also has some RPG-like elements, as you can upgrade your robotic parts over time. Stormland was one of the fantastic PCVR games funded by Oculus Studios back in the day, and we really just don't get titles like this anymore. Now, speaking of classic games, I still absolutely love Space Pirate Trainer. Yes, it's just a simple wave shooter, but it's done fantastically well. The graphics are solid, the shooter mechanics are surprisingly strategic, and it has a fantastic soundtrack that always pumps me up. Now, for the MetaQuest owners out there, they also added a truly unique experience with their DX mode. This allows you to map your full room and have a PvP room scale battle. Now, logistically, it's not the easiest thing to set up and you do need a lot of space, but if you can manage it, I highly recommend you check it out. And speaking of checking things out, any RTS fans out there should go give Battle Group a try. Battle Group has you taking control of a squadron of space fighters. Each has their own unique pros and cons, including things like speed, maneuverability, weapon capacity, armor, and shields. Your pilots also level up over time, unlocking unique abilities, and you can also fully upgrade and customize your ships. Now, unlike traditional RTS titles, there's no base building or resource gathering. Instead, this primarily focuses on micromanagement and some fierce combat. Now, you could jump in for a full single-player campaign, or go online for both co-op and PvP battles. But if you prefer to stay grounded, one of the first flat screen shooters to be ported to PCVR is still fantastic, and that is Serious Sam 3. Honestly, this game was ahead of its time, giving us not only multiple locomotion modes, but also a massive single-player campaign that just works so well in VR. I'd love to see this shooter make its way down to the Quest, because honestly, so many people missed out on this excellent title. Now, when speaking of excellent titles, a lot of people tend to miss the extremely unique fighting game Barbaria. At first glance, Barbaria seems something simplistic like Gorn, but in truth, there's a ton of unique mechanics that the game gradually introduces you to. You get to level up your own hero and arm him with unique weapons. You'll also collect an array of different minions that can also be armed and upgraded over time. You get to unlock unique magical abilities, and finally, you get to build your own unique realm that other players will actively try and invade. Not only is it an addictive gameplay loop, but it also has a massive amount of replay value. So don't be fooled by this game's appearance, it's definitely not Gorn, and go ahead and give this game a try. But if that's a few too many mechanics for you, let's scale things down and go back to Mother Gunship Forged. Mother Gunship is like a combination between wave shooter, bullet hell, and roguelike. It also has the extremely unique mechanic where you get to build some crazy weapons throughout each run. This will definitely impact your overall success, as it takes plenty of firepower to eliminate this game's epic bosses. Now, when you're looking to change things up, you could also compete in online PvP or co-op modes. But once again, a lot of people prefer a straight single-player campaign over a roguelike, and that's why I have to recommend the mech shooter Vox Machinae. The campaign drops you into a futuristic world run mostly by corporations that are farming resources throughout the galaxy. Suddenly, a mysterious new enemy appears, and they're bringing some of the strongest mechs to battle that you've ever seen. So this is a truly intense single-player campaign with lots of twists and turns, and a bit of quirky humor. Now, if the campaign's not enough for you, you could also jump online for multiplayer PvP and co-op modes. But if your main focus is high-flying, fast-paced action, there's no other title quite like Swarm. Swarm puts you up against hordes of robotic creatures, as you have to grappling hook around unique levels, and take down some extremely challenging bosses. And speaking of a challenge, this game does not pull any punches, and even on easy mode, you'll struggle your way through. Now, if you enjoy this formula but you are looking for a bit more, well, Swarm 2 introduces a whole progression system and new roguelike elements. This is a truly unique series that's ideal for VR, and believe it or not, this game does not induce any motion sickness. But if you do need to slow things down, we have another unique shooter, Super Hot. In Super Hot, enemies only move when you move, and it actually turns the gameplay into a unique puzzle-like experience. You better make every little movement count, and make sure to best utilize the sparse ammo and weapons available to you. The overall storyline also gets a bit trippy, as it has a bit of an Inception style simulation inside of a simulation theme. But another classic VR shooter that I enjoy even more is Robo Recall. This game was all about unique and fun robot murdering mechanics. You could catch bullets in midair and return them to sender, shoot enemies in the legs to trip them up, continually bob them in midair with a volley of bullets, or get up close and personal and rip their heads off. No game since has delivered such fun shooter mechanics, and this game also featured a full campaign, unlockable and upgradable weapons, and some excellent graphics. But if you're looking for a deeper storyline and some puzzles, we have Wanderer. Wanderer is a time-traveling epic adventure where many historical events such as the first moon landing have been altered. You'll journey everywhere from a flooded dystopian future to the moon, ancient civilizations, and even World War II. This is an absolute must-play title, unless of course you're just not into puzzles. So in that case, why not a few rounds of Walkabout Mini Golf? Now in real life, mini golf is one of my least favorite activities, but somehow Walkabout makes this game so exciting. It's an excellent title for just hanging out and socializing with your friends, and the huge array of new maps that they just keep pumping out are getting better and better. So don't sleep on Walkabout Mini Golf, even if it's not your type of sport. Well, let's put away from golf for a second and back to puzzle titles with the Gallery Episodes 1 and 2. This was another classic PCVR title that was way ahead of its time. This story-driven experience has you searching for your sister on a mysterious island that's experiencing some unique anomalies. The storyline takes some unique twists and turns, and even gets a bit creepy towards the end, and there's a nice array of clever puzzles throughout the experience. Now, I would have loved to see the developers give us a third title in the series, but unfortunately they've moved all of their efforts onto their newer game, Pistol Whip. Pistol Whip started off as a John Wick-style rhythm shooter, but eventually grew into some other unique experiences. You'll travel to the future fighting cyborg-like enemies, or back to the Wild West where you have to take out some cowboys. Overall, it's a truly unique experience up there with the likes of Beat Saber, and it offers up a massive amount of replayability with both a large array of maps and mutators that you could turn on for each level. But personally, I'm more of a sucker for a deep storyline, and that's why I absolutely loved Westworld Awakening. This is a tie-in to the hit HBO series, and you'll be taking on the role of an artificial host who's slowly becoming self-aware. Aspects of your previous narrative are still playing out though, which has you continually being hunted down by another host. This plays out similar to a cat and mouse style horror game like Jurassic World or Outlast on flat screen. Now jumping to a completely different style of game, we have Rec Room. Rec Room is a social application with tons of different worlds and minigames to explore. There's everything from sports titles to fantasy style quests and even laser tag, but what truly makes it special is the tons of user-generated content. Rec Room has been around nearly as long as VR and still has thousands of active daily players. Now yes, it is a bit kidsy and populated with a younger player base, but I still think everyone should give it a try because it's fun for all ages. And speaking of games that everyone should give a try, all RPG fans should jump into Carnage Chronicles. This is another one of those early PCVR titles that went above and beyond, delivering a lengthy campaign, excellent visuals, and some high quality combat. Now you can play this title in both single player and co-op, which gives two uniquely distinct playstyles. In single player, the combat is a lot more refined and strategic, but once a bunch of your friends jump in, it starts to devolve into more of a hack and slash. Now, if you do want to play this in co-op, you will have to bring some friends along because the overall player base dried up a very long time ago. So instead, if you're looking for a multiplayer title that has a very active player base, you should go ahead and jump into No Man's Sky. No Man's Sky is easily one of the most robust VR games available. There's everything from a single-player campaign to exploration, crafting, alien interactions, online multiplayer, and of course, lots of different combat. You could take to the stars in interplanetary dogfights, or just remain grounded and build your own base camp. This title has added so much content over time that if you end up enjoying it, you really don't need to play anything else. Now, if you want to keep your crafting a bit more simplistic and also add a bit of a horror theme, well then a good title for you would be The Forest. This game has you crash landing on an island that's unfortunately populated with cannibals and mutant creatures. Luckily though, you can scavenge for equipment and not only build up a base, but also an array of different traps. Now, if you find the overall theme a bit too creepy, you can luckily bring some friends along to help keep you safe. Now, our next game also has us crash landing, but this time it's on an alien world. Hubris is an absolutely stunning action-adventure title that'll have you jumping, climbing, swimming, and fighting your way through a lot of different obstacles, including alien creatures. At launch, the game did suffer from a bit of mediocre combat, but I'm happy to report that updates have definitely improved this over time. So if you're looking for an absolutely beautiful VR world to jump into, Hubris is an easy recommendation. But sometimes graphics don't matter and it's all about the gameplay, and that's when I recommend the Flight Sim VTOL. Now, this isn't exactly a full-on flight simulator, as you will be taking control of an array of different military vehicles, and the controls have been dumbed down a bit. Now, it's still complex enough to provide a real challenge, but you're not going to need a year in flight school. Over time, the campaign will slowly introduce you to all the different controls, and before you know it, you'll be a top-notch fighter pilot. There's a huge array of content here to keep you coming back, and there's even some community-made missions to explore. Now, if that overall complexity throws you off, why not keep it simple with my favorite free-to-play arena shooter? Hyperdash is an absolutely amazing PvP experience that not only keeps the action fast-paced, but also knows how to best utilize VR mechanics. Not only will you be rail gliding your way into combat, but you could also perform these little teleportation hops that absolutely change the flow of combat. So if you haven't tried this game yet, go download it right now and then thank me later. Now, for the non-PvP fans out there who are looking for some storytelling, I still highly recommend Vader Immortal. Vader Immortal not only gives you some background information onto how the planet Mustafar became covered in lava, but it's also a side story about how Vader is still obsessed with the loss of Padme. Now, getting up close and personal with this iconic villain is truly intimidating, and there's just plenty of awesome moments throughout this 3-part series. The campaign itself is definitely on the shorter side, but there's also an excellent wave shooter style dojo that adds a lot of replay value. Now, sticking with story-driven single-player experiences, I also recommend the horror-themed zombie shooter, The Living Remain. This is your back-to-basics, good old-fashioned zombie story. The world's gone to crap, supplies are scarce, and you just need to do whatever it takes to survive. Overall, this game just did everything well. The pacing is solid, the combat is fun, but also partially anxiety-inducing as you get swarmed by zombies, and I was definitely invested to see what would happen next in the overall storyline. But I do understand that horror is not for everyone, and there's a lot more mainstream appeal when it comes to comedy, which is one aspect that makes the I Expected to Die series so good. This quirky, spy-themed series of escape rooms will not only shock you with an array of different sudden death, but also make you laugh out loud on multiple occasions. It's a puzzle game that somehow doesn't feel like a puzzle game, and each game in the series just gets better and better, continuing that overall whimsical storyline. But where whimsy goes to die, we have The Persistence. This is an extremely creepy, horror-themed, roguelike adventure title. You'll find yourself as the seemingly lone survivor on a derelict space station where the cloning machines have gone awry and started spitting out monsters. Luckily though, those systems can still rebuild you when you die, but in the meantime you'll have to sneak and battle your way through procedurally generated levels, and the game will constantly tease you with its risk versus reward mechanics. You could sneak up on enemies to try and harvest some DNA, which is a valuable resource, but it's also likely you'll end up exposing yourself and getting killed in combat. Now, my only complaint with this title is its PlayStation VR roots, which left the PC version lacking motion controls. And speaking of motion controls, a fantastic usage comes from one of my favorite fighting games, Until You Fall. Until You Fall drops you into this beautiful neon-themed fantasy world where you have to fight your way through an array of different creatures. Instead of physics-based combat, this game utilizes a very unique system that'll have you ducking, blocking, and countering an array of different attacks. Weapons are stat-based and can excel at either defense or offense, and each has their own special ability. You can unlock and upgrade a wide array of different weapons over time, and not only is this game an extreme challenge, but also can substitute as your daily cardio. So if you're not willing to break that much of a sweat, the free-to-play Battle Royale Population 1 might be more your style. Now, this game still holds the title of #1 VR Battle Royale, at least for now, and Big Box Studio has also recently brought the title in a whole new direction, giving players access to a world-building sandbox mode. Here you don't need to stick to the battle royale formula, and you can build things like obstacle courses, PvP maps, or just a really cool hangout spot for you and your friends. But if you're friendless just like me, you might spend more time in single player games like Blade and Sorcery. This is easily some of the best combat that VR has to offer, giving you access to not only a huge array of different weapons, but also some really cool magical abilities. Now this game has improved so much over time, but it's still primarily a sandbox title, but at least there's plenty of really exciting mods out there to keep this game exciting. Now, if you're looking for more than just good combat, my go-to title would be Underdogs. This game is dripping with style and puts you in control of multi-ton mechs in gritty underground fighting arenas. The overall feel of combat is absolutely fantastic, as the game encourages you to do big sweeping punches that'll end up blasting your enemies across the screen. As a roguelike, this game will also be giving you random perks and abilities, and no two runs will ever be exactly the same. Now, if you end up being really good at this game, you could blast through it in a couple of hours, but the developers do have a roadmap of new content coming, which I'm really looking forward to. Now, a title that was basically perfect as is and needs no additional updates is the story-driven puzzle experience Red Matter 2. I'm admittedly not much of a puzzle fan, but this game's overall stunning graphics and intriguing storyline absolutely sucked me in. The puzzles were also the perfect level of challenging, so I never found myself getting overly frustrated. The introduction of combat in the second title is a bit of hit and miss, as it did help with the overall pacing, but also feels a little bland. But overall, that's my biggest complaint, and Red Matter 2 is a must-try game for all VR players except the ones who absolutely hate puzzles. So for the enigma adversed among us, let's move on to Ghost Signal, a Solaris story. Yes, this is once again yet another VR roguelike, but it's completely different than everything else you've played. Instead of in-your-face physical combat, you're controlling a spaceship from a third-person viewpoint. From here, you'll be engaging in some highly strategic combat and making your way through the universe with some risk versus reward mechanics. You're attempting to locate a mysterious signal, which ends up trapping you in a time loop, so anytime you die, you start over. However, your overall knowledge remains. So in each run, you'll get some temporary buffs, but over time, you'll unlock some permanent upgrades. This is easily one of the most addictive VR games I've ever played, and I know it doesn't look like much on flat screen, but if the concept does at least sound interesting, I highly recommend you go check it out. Speaking of games worth checking out, another easy recommendation is Contractors. This is like VR's version of Call of Duty with both single player and multiplayer modes, but what makes this title extra special is its built-in mods. The community has recreated multiplayer experiences like Halo and Star Wars Battlefront, just to name a few. So not only is the original content excellent, but also that massive array of mods that the community just keeps pumping out. Now in terms of overall content, almost nothing beats out Elite Dangerous. Now this spacefaring flight sim can definitely be quite intimidating, but if you really get into it, it's extremely rewarding, and it might be the only game you end up playing for the next year. This game released almost 10 years ago and still has thousands of daily active players, so trust me here guys, there's a lot to learn and do in this world. But in space, no one can hear you scream, and that won't work for our next title, Phasmophobia. This is the ultimate multiplayer ghost hunting experience. You and 3 of your friends are tasked with going into multiple haunted locations and identify what type of malicious entity is lurking there. This title tests your sanity both in and outside of the game, and you'll have to learn how to best utilize an array of different ghost tracking tools. Now, I've never played another game that has made me fear for my life and laugh so hard at the same time. Even if you're a scaredy cat, this is an absolute must play with a bunch of your friends. But if you'd rather do more than just track the undead with your friends, why not go ahead and bash their faces in with Dungeons of Eternity? This RPG/dungeon crawler not only has some excellent style and unique mechanics, but it also has some of the best physics-based combat you'll find on the quest. There's multiple unique dungeon types to explore, each filled with some truly deadly beasties. Over time, you'll eventually unlock some new weapons and armor, plus some cybernetic implants that'll augment your character. The overall replay value on this game cannot be overstated, as you can easily dump over 100 hours into this game. Now, another game that you could pump a lot of hours into is In Death Unchained. This archery-based roguelike has you diving into the afterlife, scaling cathedrals, and battling everything from zombies to straight-up demons. The overall challenge level on this game is quite high. In fact, the majority of people who bought it have never completed it. Now, this title actually has an old-school carryover locomotion mechanic from back in its PCVR days, where you teleport yourself across the map using either your bolts or arrows. But unlike those old-school teleportation-style games, this actually really works here. Now, if you're not up for the extreme challenge the game offers, there is an endless tower defense style mode that you could jump into. Now, something else you could jump into, the Radius. Okay, that was a stretch of a segue, but Into the Radius is this really dark, dystopian world that's populated by these weird shadow-like creatures and continually undergoing some mysterious anomalies. This unforgiving horror-themed survival title not only drip-feeds you an intriguing story, but also completely immerses you in this dark world. The game's admittedly not for everyone, but if that is your style, you should end up loving this. Similar to our next title, Assassin's Creed Nexus. The stealth genre is definitely underutilized in VR, but what a way to deliver it with the iconic Assassin's Creed series. In terms of production value, Assassin's Creed delivers more than we typically get with VR, and it also delivers with excellent mechanics, fun combat, high-quality graphics, and an intriguing storyline. Personally, I'm not a big fan of Assassin's Creed in general, but I definitely enjoyed my playthrough of this game. Speaking of playthroughs, how about one that never ends with Skyrim VR? That's right, this famous, or maybe at this point infamous, flat-screen RPG is just as good or even better in VR. In true Bethesda fashion, the vanilla version is riddled with bugs and only good on its own, but once you hit up that mod scene, this game is unlike anything else. There's extensive graphic overhauls, new content, full physics combat systems, and a significantly improved user interface. Skyrim is one of those games that just keeps giving, and it's not uncommon to hear people say they have thousands of hours in this game. Now, if you don't need a content overload and prefer to be a superhero, the easy choice is Iron Man VR. Not only will you don this iconic suit, but the in-game mechanics will also make you feel like the man himself. Repulsor blasts from your palms, rockets from your wrists, and that ultimate unibeam blasting out of your chest. The first level of this game gives me goosebumps every time I play it, so besides some repetitive, almost grindy combat, everything in this game is fantastic. The storyline takes some interesting twists and turns, albeit a bit predictable, but the flying and combat mechanics are top-notch, and they truly utilize VR to make you feel like Iron Man. But if you prefer telekinesis over technology, well then welcome to the grayscale world of Synapse. This unique roguelike shooter has you diving into the mind of an individual in order to extract some information. Unfortunate for you, their mind has been fortified, and they're actively fighting back with some soldier-like creatures. Over time, you'll gain more and more telekinetic powers, which make you feel like a total badass. It's like becoming a one-man Sith Lord army. This is easily one of my favorite PSVR 2 games, and I'd love to see it come to some other platforms. Now returning to multi-plat PvP titles, we have the Rainbow Six Siege style shooter, Breachers. This is from the same studio that gave us Hyperdash, and instead of turning up the combat pace, they made it a lot more strategic with the utilization of some specialized tools. These are designed to help you either breach or defend a point, which is part of the classic gameplay mode. As of making this video, Breachers has a very active player base, and the developers are about to drop a new competitive update. But if competition isn't your style, why not enjoy a 4-person co-op shooter with After the Fall? I mean, sure, we are once again mowing down zombies in VR, but at least this time it's the 1980s and they're snow-covered. Joking aside, After the Fall is an excellent title, and it's basically VR's Left 4 Dead. There's been plenty of content updates that dropped since this game originally released, including one that just came today. After the Fall is still very much alive, and I still highly recommend it. But moving more to a forgotten title that now only remains on the PlayStation VR 1, we have Farpoint. Like your typical sci-fi movie, a space anomaly leaves you stranded on some alien world, which not only houses hostile creatures, but also its own mysteries. Now, what really roped me into Farpoint was the intriguing storytelling, but it also had some really fun combat, and I played this game straight through in one day. Now, one little added bonus that I didn't even notice until after I beat the game is there's also an option to play through in co-op. Now, a completely different style of co-op gaming is the turn-based dungeon crawler Demeo. Enter a dungeon with a party of up to 4 heroes, and finally make it down to the bottom level and take out the boss. It's designed to emulate tabletop gameplay, and you'll be physically rolling dice and picking up your miniatures. Now, if the co-op dungeon crawl isn't exactly your style, they recently released Demeo Battles, which is a much faster paced 1v1 or 2v2 PvP mode. I love both experiences equally, and I guess it just matters what exactly you're looking for. Okay, so we are getting down to the top 20 games right now, and these are not only some of my favorite all-time VR games, but also the best representation of their genre. So when it comes to platformers, not much surpasses the Moss series. There's some surprisingly beautiful graphics and stunning worlds, excellent platforming puzzles and content, a storyline that delivers a surprising amount of emotion, and easily VR's best protagonist, the Mouse Quill. This 2-game series is a must-play for all VR gamers, even if you are not a fan of platforming. For the longest time, I was a holdout and didn't play this game because I just didn't think it was my style, but boy was I so wrong. And the same could be said for the next platformer, Astrobot. On one hand, Astrobot is an even better platformer than Morse, with a equally lovable in-game protagonist. Where the titles do differ is Astrobot is much more of a straightforward platformer, with no emphasis on combat, but slightly better usage of VR immersion. It's an absolute sin that Astrobot is only on the PlayStation VR 1, and I'm absolutely dying for a new sequel. A frequent comment I see though is, I'm sick of these kiddie VR games, give me the blood and guts, and that's why we're moving on to Ghost of Tabor. This is the extraction shooter of VR, giving us an experience like Escape from Tarkov. You'll be dropped into an unforgiving world where you're scavenging for equipment and learning not to trust anyone you encounter. But when you do get the hang of it, you'll be stacking up weapons and equipment in no time. I'm much more of a co-op fantasy style game though, and that's why our next title is Legendary Tales. This 4-person action RPG not only has one of the best character progression systems, but also the best VR multiplayer physics-based combat. Enemies truly react to getting smacked around, and amazingly, weapons do feel like they have their own individual weight. There's also a massive amount of content with plenty of creatures and bosses to fight, plus a wide array of spells and legendary items. If this game also had a high-quality storyline, it would probably be my #1 VR title of all time. But for many, that game is actually the classic PvP shooter Pavlov. This Counter-Strike clone is still going extremely strong, and over time we've received countless updates, including new content and full gameplay modes. But not only is it the classic PvP bomb planting, but also other things like TTT and zombie horde modes, plus whatever else the community dreams up with the huge array of mods that are out there. Completely changing up the rhythm, our next title is Beat Saber. I'm still completely shocked that a game about slicing cubes to the beat of a song could be so good. It's the type of title or gameplay you couldn't imagine until after VR released. It's almost like how do we turn Dance Dance Revolution into a combat sport. With a near never-ending supply of new songs released and an extremely lengthy mastery time, you could be playing this game forever. Which is pretty crazy though, because this game is also so noob friendly. The mechanics are so easy to pick up, but are just so hard to master. I will say though, I'm much more of a single player campaign guy, and that's the theme of the remaining games, starting with the Walking Dead Saints and Sinners series. Saints and Sinners delivers on pretty much everything you can ask for. Dark gritty world set in the Walking Dead universe, high quality graphics, fantastic melee combat, a lengthy campaign with an interesting storyline, and plenty of WTF gaming moments that'll just stick with you. I know the whole zombie theme is overdone in VR, but that doesn't matter when it's done this well. But instead of hiding in the shadows, let's crank up the pace and enter the Star Wars universe with Star Wars Squadrons. This starfighter simulation was an absolute dream come true for me, and I love the fact that I got to play on both sides of the war throughout the game's 10-hour campaign. Every single ship feels completely unique with its own pros and cons, and the overall combat is surprisingly strategic as you're managing the power level for your shields, engines, and weapons, while utilizing some specialized equipment to either evade death or take out your enemies. Mechanically, the game is extremely sound, and it only gets even better in large-scale PvP, but unfortunately this game has definitely dried up at this point. Speaking of dried up, I can't believe the fact that there's still people in our next single-player game, Boneworks. This extremely unique VR shooter took physics to the max, and also delivered an atypical campaign. You're dropped into a mysterious simulation-style world, you can physically interact with anything you see, and you're basically just left to your own devices, with no rhyme or reason on what to do next. Now that style of campaign experience definitely wasn't for everyone, but where this game truly shined for me was the weapon handling, physical interactions, and the fantastic arena mode. I actually enjoyed Boneworks a lot more than Bone Lab, but overall they're two very similar titles, and Bone Lab not only gives you more of a campaign, but also many different gameplay modes. Now we've already made it down to the top 10 games, and I'm happy to report we have a few new ones this year. But starting off with an older title, we have the psychological horror game Resident Evil 7. This was not only a departure from the classic Resident Evil style, but also designed to be much more up in your face and to highlight virtual reality. Now, being stuck in a house with a group of psychotic individuals is already terrifying enough, but when you're also dealing with hallucinations and people that just won't die, it might be a bit much for the average person to handle, so instead let's go fight some robotic, animalistic creatures. Horizon Call of the Mountain delivers just about everything we're looking for in a high-quality VR game. Not only is there stunning visuals and intense combat, but also great usage of VR mechanics, a highly immersive world, and a way above average production value. My main complaint here was the storyline just didn't go deep enough, nor did it really tie into the flat screen games. But if you have no interest in sci-fi, maybe you'd prefer the racing sim Gran Turismo 7. I'm personally not a racing game fan at all, but even I found this title extremely compelling. Graphically, it's a stunner, and both the amount of content and attention to detail blew me away. Playing Gran Turismo 7 in VR is getting extremely close to real life. But real life could be boring, so let's go back to killing zombies in Resident Evil 4. This is arguably the best Resident Evil game of all time, and the Quest port of this nearly 15-year-old title was done amazingly well. I honestly didn't think they'd be able to pull it off, nor would I enjoy once again replaying this game for the 15th time. But I was wrong twice, and Resident Evil 4 is some of the best that VR has to offer, and the only way to outshine it would be to completely remake the game, which is what Capcom did. The Resident Evil 4 remake updates the graphics to modern standards and adds whole new VR mechanics that just feel perfect. So basically, they made an already great game even better. But I said it before and I'll say it again, some people just can't handle horror, and that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed Vertigo 1 and 2 even more than the Resident Evil series. Vertigo feels like an old school Half-Life game that's been mixed with a dash of Rick and Morty. It's filled with wacky creatures and quirky moments, but under that is some truly refined mechanics, an extremely unique array of weapons, and some overall excellent level design. The developer has labeled this game a Half-like title, showing how it's clearly inspired by the Half-Life series, and I believe it's definitely worthy of that name. But I still gotta give the overall edge to Resident Evil Village. Unlike the previous Resident Evil title, this game brings a lot more action, and it's a lot less playing cat and mouse with characters that you can't kill, so it was definitely a bit more my speed. It's also some of the highest production value to ever grace VR, but I wish we got a lot more hybrid games just like this. I will say though that the made for VR games still take my #1 spots though, and our next titles is the Lone Echo series. This is easily some of the best storytelling in a video game, VR or not. What starts as another space title where you're acting as space repairman, goes sideways extremely fast, and the storyline just gets weirder and weirder from there. The second game in the series is more of the same, but pretty much better in every single way. Besides the extremely slow start of both games, I absolutely love this series, and based on the overall lore they created, I felt like they could have made 10 spin-off titles. But a game that I would love to see a sequel for even more is Half-Life Alyx. I know there's still plenty of people out there that say Half-Life Alyx is overrated, but I feel like they're just kidding themselves. Valve knew exactly how to make VR shine, delivered an amazing story set in the Half-Life universe, gave us top-notch shooter mechanics, and easily VR's most memorable moments. If you're yet to meet Jeff, you are definitely missing out in VR. And right now you guys must be thinking, what the heck am I going to put above Half-Life Alyx? And I can't believe I'm doing this, but it's the Asgard Wrath series. The original Asgard's Wrath was absolutely fantastic with a 40+ hour story, both cutscenes and gameplay that knew how to best utilize VR, and both excellent combat and puzzle mechanics. Now the second game in the series surpasses that in almost every single way except for the graphics. But even with that significant fidelity downgrade, this game still has a higher production value, a better storyline, way improved combat, and a whole roguelike experience that was worthy of being its own game. I'm still playing Asgard's Wrath 2 months later, and I honestly thought my love for this title would have faded by now, but it's still just as strong. And let's end today's video with our #1 game, which is whatever the hell you want it to be. Go ahead and drop down to the comments and let me know what your favorite VR game of all time is, or if I missed any games that you think should be on the top 100. Now honestly, it was nearly impossible for me to arrange these games. Everything on this list I truly enjoyed, and based on your personal preference, I'm sure you can move things around. But overall, I just really hope you guys enjoyed this list and maybe found a few new games to try out. If you did, go ahead and throw me a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and as always, I'll see you guys on next time.